everyone. I'm Ishika.
And I'm Akshay.
The thing about wildlife is anyone can fall in love with it through science, photography, literature, or innocent observation.
Sharing their love today is Nupur Kale, a marine biologist and conservationist who has worked extensively with turtles and people.
So, on today's episode, we are absolutely stoked to have with us Nupur Kale, a project associate with the Marine Program at the Wildlife Conservation Society India. Nupur has worked with sea turtle biology and conservation for nearly a decade in research projects across India in places like Odisha, Maharashtra, and the Lakshwadweep Islands, as well as for short periods of time in Sri Lanka and Costa Rica. Her main research interests are sea turtle biology and conservation. She's also interested in working with communities to ensure effective conservation and sustainable livelihoods, which is a very interesting and diverse list of things to talk about today. So, welcome, Nupur. It's such a pleasure to have you with us here on the podcast.
Thank you so much, guys. It's a pleasure to be here, with people who've probably experienced the same things, but in different spaces. So it's nice. You'll understand my pain, perhaps, or the lack of it.
Oh, we're really excited. And you're also the first person we are speaking to on the podcast that has worked so predominantly in the marine side of things. So we're very happy to have you here and lots to chat about. So we're going to start, right at the beginning, like we usually do. And we recently got to know that you spent much of your early years traveling North India, and you come from an armed forces background, which involved a lot of travel. And eventually you landed up in Pune. And Pune is also one of the cities that has a terrific bunch of young people interested in nature. And there seems to be a very curious mentality towards natural history and preserving some of those places. And many people who we know have also ended up making it part of their career. So is this something that influenced you as well? I mean, what is it about Pune and this nature loving culture that they have?
So, very honestly, I have thought about this a lot because a lot of people have asked me this question. And when I really think about it, I think it had a lot to do with my upbringing as an army kid, because my dad was mostly posted in, semi-urban areas. In fact, Pune was the only city that in the first 20 years of my life that I've lived in. Otherwise, it was all areas on the outskirts of some major town, not even a city. And, I've lived close to the Satpuras. My dad was posted in multiple parts of the Himalayas. So I think for me, it wasn't so much that I love nature, but it was, I feel comfortable in spaces where there's, nature is the predominant factor rather than your concrete jungle. Of course, coming to Pune, even though it's a city, we are spoiled because there's a hill just like 5 minutes walking distance from my house. I see like sunbirds and bee eaters and whatnot from my bedroom window. So like I said, I don't think it was so much to do with the company I had, because honestly speaking, a lot of my friends, actually most of my friends are like engineers or doctors at this point, not quite the bird watchers or the entomologists one would expect. But yeah, I think it was the spaces that influenced me a lot. And my parents, my dad especially, he loves driving to places. So all our tourism within the country has been driving to areas. And when you just go across different landscapes just on one trip alone, it's just absolutely wondrous. Like yeah, you just love it so much that you can't forget it. Even as you're growing up, even when we were in Pune, there were points when I know my brother and I were just like, I wish we could go back to those pristine places where, there are very few human beings, and, you can actually hear sounds of nature rather than just, somebody's car honking or like an ambulance and things like that. But even when I went to Pune and when I started my undergrad, I think I was surrounded by a lot of people really enthusiastic in nature. And definitely, I think they were way more passionate than I am. And, it tends to rub off when you hang out with such people, it tends to rub off on you. And um, yeah, you sort of become a part of that. But I think secondly, it was all those lovely Discovery and Animal Planet documentaries that we've all grown up watching. I think it was a part of our TV curriculum. And yeah, people like Steve Irwin and Jeff Corwin. I don't think I would do the things they did, but it was definitely exciting to watch all the spaces they visited. Especially like Steve Irwin, because he was from Australia. He was just surrounded by some of the most beautiful places on this planet. So it was incredible. And I think, yeah, that definitely served as an inspiration. And when it was time to actually get into this field, I was like, yeah, I think I can do this. I think I would love to do this. This is where I'm most comfortable.
Yeah, that is highly relatable, because when I tell people I grew up in Bangalore, it's not the same. I was there were jungle cats around and butterflies and all of that. And I think this is such a common thread among people in this field, people who study anything related to nature as a profession, that they now are tending to emphasize holding on to the nature that's in the city and like not letting it escape. And perhaps it's because they recognize that we all recognize the importance of that growing up. Uh, I think we could now move on to what you did after that. So soon after your undergrad, you went on to study sea turtles, and you've been studying sea turtles in one way or another for almost a decade now. And you've spent a lot of your time doing potentially your first love in terms of your study system. And you've explored many species and fields along the way, of course. But why turtles? Where did it start, and when?
That's another great question. And I think my answer is going to be quite the letdown. So it wasn't so much sea turtles. I was interested in marine biology. But when it was time to choose what do I do for my master's, I decided to go for like conservation biology, which kind of took terrestrial, marine, just all systems together instead of just marine, because I suppose I was a little unsure if I would actually love marine biology when I got into it. So I decided to do something more general. But when it was time to do my thesis, I was like, okay, now maybe I can give it a shot. And one of the professors previously had a student who worked on sea turtles, and he asked me if I would be interested in working on sea turtles for my thesis. Um, and strangely, now that I look back, I also did a couple of my assignments during my master's, which were on sea turtles, completely unplanned. But so when it was time to do my thesis, I was quite aware of what to do and how to navigate things. And of course, then I went to Sri Lanka and did my thesis there. And I just had a great time. It was just so peaceful. It would make me very calm. Just the entire aspect of it. It was marvelous. Like, watching that sea turtle and green turtles, they're giant, they're super heavy. You would see like this female green turtle, climb up on the beach to lay her eggs. It would take hours, but, she would still go through that effort. I know it's a more mechanical process, but at the same time, it was just incredible to watch that, when she wanted to nest, she would come up and nest regardless of what was going around. And that was amazing to watch. And just in general, even volunteering at that hatchery was such a great experience. And I'm going to, again, pitch in some things that people frown upon, but charismatic species, sea turtles look great. Hatchlings are super cute. You can't not fall in love with hatchlings. So yeah, I think that definitely played a huge role. And once I finished my master's and I came back to India and it was time to start working my first, I was sort of torn between sea turtles or community-based conservation. But thankfully, luckily, I got an opportunity, to work in Orissa. And I think that kind of changed it for me, because I saw my first mass nesting, and it's scary because you have like these hundreds of turtles, coming onto the beach. It a lot of times it's just like 2 or 3 human beings, including you, who are on the beach, and you're surrounded by turtles. It was incredible, and it just never gets old. It never gets old. I've seen like 3 or 4 mass nestings at this point. I've seen hundreds of green turtles at this point, but every time I see a turtle, it's exciting. And in between, I even considered, maybe trying out something different when I was like 24, 25, just to see if there's something else that I might enjoy. But yeah, you know what? I went back to sea turtles. I tried very hard, but yeah, and it's comfortable now for me. It's very comfortable working on sea turtles, um, because I just know everything about their biology or what is required for conservation. I think I know all the right people in India, especially, and some abroad, who've been great help. So at this point, it's a matter of comfort, and of course, the excitement I get every time I see one sea turtle. Yeah, it's unparalleled, I have to say.
Yeah, no, I had, like a couple of follow-ups to ask you about how you could possibly retain that kind of focus for so long on a single species. But I think what you said is so self-explanatory. I mean, just I'm trying to put myself in your shoes and imagine, looking at a mass, like looking at an arribada for the first time with hundreds of sea turtles, and I'm sure that's quite life-changing. Sight to
It
behold.
is. Yeah. I just don't know, I've never seen anything of that sort. I had never before that. Like, you see all these animals on safaris and everything, and you'll see, I mean, I've never been to Africa. I'll probably have a better experience in Africa when you just see like herds and herds of wild beast or something. That might be a similar experience, but here it's just, 5-6 days of just like thousands of turtles around you, turtles who don't care about you, turtles who just want to nest. And it's also a little inspirational also, to a certain extent, where, like, be focused sort of a thing. So I think that, and just to add to it, I feel like it's also been support from a lot of people, of course, parents, first and foremost. They don't quite understand, like, they're super proud of me. I don't think they understand completely what I do or what actually goes on behind the scenes. But they have always been supportive. Like, even when I wanted to go to Costa Rica to do a research assistantship, they were scared. They were like, you're going to a country where we do not know anyone, where you know the language, but you're not like fluent in it. We don't have any friends, absolutely nobody. The person we know close, like the area closest, is the US, so which is still far off. How are you going to do this? But they were like, okay, you know what, if you think it's going to help you, if it's going to, help your career, go for it, be safe, text us every 5 minutes. um, but I think their support, and definitely the support of a lot of my friends or mentors in the wildlife field also, because we all have moments when we doubt ourselves. And like I said, I was considering changing, just experimenting with something else in between. But a lot of my friends supported me and said, you know what, A, that's fine if you want to do it. B, it's also fine if you want to come back to sea turtles. But yeah, I think human beings and turtles have been instrumental in sort of helping me focus on what I want to do and how I should do it. And sometimes it's fine to not do certain things the right way.
I mean, there's also not, I don't think there is a single right way. Also, I mean, considering so many people who we've, got the chance to talk to, even through the podcast itself, everyone's had such a unique journey and how they ended up where they are. I think it's really hard to chalk out, the way to get to where you are. Well, and also what one thing that I wanted to talk about when you mentioned the first time you went and worked in Sri Lanka, and just how beautiful and calming and wonderful it is. So I also thought I'd take like a step back and ask you about whether you think this marine ecosystem just leaves you as a different person as you compare it to people who work on land, or they seem to be in a different personality genre altogether, like complete they come off as a lot more collected and put together and self-assured. Is that true, or is that a facade?
I think that's a facade. I think we're very good at hiding that on the inside we're actually crying. But yeah, if I have to compare, I think first of all, the marine world of whatever biology or conservation, I think it's such a small community. And regardless of, in what part of the world you are, it's very easy to have similar experiences. So even, if I'm talking to someone right now sitting in Colombia, I'm pretty sure that person and I have experienced a lot of the same things, even though we're on two different ends of the world. And like I said, experiences bind people together. So because this community is so small, it's just easier for us to kind of navigate through things as a group rather than as an individual also. But yeah, I don't think we're the most sorted out people because, like I said, experience changes you. Even if you think you are the most sorted out person, something like weather conditions, choppy seas, or permits will just come your way and yeah, just ruin it all for you.
Yeah, and I think one of these very interesting learnings that you described through one's career was what you wrote in the Conservation Optimism website. Conservation Optimism is, I think, this group where people talk about the positive stories of conservation and how that can keep people inspired. And you describe a very interesting, I wanted to pick your brain on that. So you describe the benefits of ex situ and in situ conservation. That was what you went in with. And you found some very non-intuitive results where there was a certain alignment of ecology and economic incentive where people were, keeping the hatchlings and hatcheries potentially in conditions that are not optimal ecologically, but it was giving them a lot of revenue. And this makes you rethink a lot of cultural things that we have as baggage, especially in the Indian conservation circles, where it's like, oh my God, no, we can't even think of some monetizing these sort of actions. But I think Dakshin, who you've been associated with quite a bit, advocates for this. So, do you think it's a cultural issue? Do you think that India particularly has this sort of, don't touch wildlife, it'll break, or some sort of an approach?
Not really, I don't think it's cultural at all because culturally, actually, we are so used to growing up around these things. We are all comfortable with it. We know, especially now, communities that live in or with wildlife just know the do's and don'ts when it comes to interacting with the wildlife for most part. So I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing, but I think, also having said that, if you think about it now, you do see a lot of these responsible ecotourism initiatives that are happening around the country, which are for most part run by the local communities, with help from some external agency, be it the government or be it some NGO. So I don't think it's difficult in India, but I think India being a vast country, it's, I can try something in Bangalore. I am pretty sure the same thing will not be successful in Mysore. Like it's that simple. And after a point, there's only so many times one can experiment. We're all kind of running out of money to do our own projects. And conservation is all about experimentation and, figuring out what is the right way to do things or not the right way to do things. So I think it is possible, but what it requires is, tremendous patience for one, tremendous funding, sort of taking into consideration everything and everyone that will be involved in that project. which I feel bad to say, but that is something that is quite lacking in our country. We always end up missing out that one participant who is just the most crucial you know person in that collaboration. um, but yeah, like I've worked in areas like Velas, which is a great place because you have the local communities pitching in towards sea turtle conservation. Sea turtle conservation is helping them have tourism in their areas. They're able to promote their culture because of these homestays, which are very rustic. There's no, you won't find ACs or any fancy beds or any fancy amenities. It's very basic. um, so yeah, it is possible, but I think it's the stars have to be aligned, sort of a thing. And also I also feel there has to be that sense of wanting to work together, but at the same time be willing to compromise on a few things. um, and remembering that the focus has to be conservation and livelihoods together. I think a lot of times what happens is one trumps the other after a certain point of time. Like, it all starts with great intentions and everyone being on board, but like 5-6 years down the line, either people will start thinking more about the money, or there'll be some super enthusiastic conservationist who's just like, no, I want to save this habitat, people's livelihoods are not that important, sort of a thing. um, and unfortunately, you can try your best, but I think even across the world, we've all seen that things always start out wonderfully, but at some point they just hit a roadblock. Even Sri Lanka, for that matter, I mean, it was, I used to take like printouts of scientific papers and show it to the hatchery manager and be like, hey, what, this is what the scientists have found out, and this is what we should be doing. And it'll also help your hatchery to a certain extent. And I was lucky enough to be at that hatchery where he was receptive to my feedback. So it worked out. I think if I had been somewhere where the owner was a little more stronger personality, he probably wouldn't have listened to me. But yeah, like, it's just, it's a marriage of sorts. Everything, there is compromise, it takes time, it requires patience. I hope as a country we reach that stage at some point. I think we are there somewhere. It's just a matter of all of us coming together and not being selfish to a certain extent, and being more inclusive of all the participants. And I think it's doable. Everything's doable, where there's a will, there's a way. So yeah, fingers crossed. Let's hope for the best.
Yeah, all of those things are, so many of those things are themes that resonate from our short experience in the field as well. I think talking to people with experience, they tell you all of these issues. And one thing that caught my attention was this dichotomy between how you mentioned we're all scrambling for funds and we're trying to get money to do what we think is right. And a lot of the funding is aimed towards scaling, right, to making things bigger and bigger. And at the same time, you talk about how the local context and involving all the stakeholders is so important that it can, and it usually collapses after a few years. Is there a alignment here? Do you think that scaling is bad?
um I suppose yes. I think simpler the better. Less is more, all of that. And I think it also then it does limit you to a certain extent, which is great. Then nobody basically gets greedy, sort of a thing. But yeah, I don't think this is something I would want to sort of comment on.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
I don't want people stoning me.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those questions that everyone has to think about at some point in their careers, right? I mean, whether to stay locally or like pick something small and scale it up, stay in one place and go deep. I mean, again, like, it comes off as sounding very diplomatic, but I doubt that there's actually only one way to do it. I guess it's also like the philosophy of conservation that you come from. um, yeah, but like also building upon what you were saying earlier about how sea turtles and people are kind of what have kept you focused for so long, and we were also starting to talk about a lot of the practical side of things in doing this work. You've also written about how many people you included, and I know Akshay and I included, we all start off very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, right? And we think that being a biologist or an ecologist of any kind means you get to work with wildlife and directly with these species, and it's all very exciting when you're just starting off your career or reading about it or studying it. But on ground realities are so different, and especially if you want to go beyond just biology, you actually end up having to work so closely with human beings, and which is a bit ironic sometimes, because many people who get into this field feel like, oh, we like animals more than people, and then you end up having to work with people. um, so when did this realization strike you, and what has this been like?
I think there were multiple moments. I am going to sound so naive, but when I started my master's, I went with this, like you said, went with that mindset that yes, I want to work on this species or this habitat or this particular ecosystem and save the world, save the cheerleader, sort of a thing. And it during the course of my master's, I had a lot of classmates who were quite elder to me, like almost 13, 14 years elder to me, with vast experiences. And a lot of them from developing countries like in Latin America and Southeast Asia and all. So, and we had these two compulsory social science modules in our first semester, which I was like, okay, fine, compulsory, I'll just somehow get it over with and then get to the core of my master's, which is more natural sciences. But it was these discussions during the social sciences modules, my classmates and professors would have these debates. I don't want to say this, but like my professors were all, from the UK. So their experiences are kind of different from what my classmates had experienced. And that's when they would talk a lot about, how communities are important, like conservation aside, communities are equally important, and we need to take into consideration, how they work and all of that. And it was during those sort of discussions that I started thinking about it, and I was like, damn it, I come from the most populous country in the world. This is something that I might clearly run into during the course of my work. So perhaps I need to pay a little more attention to it and not be, blind to it or just be ignorant of it. So I audited a class on community-based conservation, even like in the next semester and things like that. So I had heard of, all my friends' experiences and, learned sufficiently what the methods are and all of that. But obviously, when it was time to do my thesis, I was like, natural sciences, let's go. But so that was the first time. And the second time was when I actually started doing the fieldwork for my thesis, and I was volunteering at that hatchery and eventually, became familiar with the people that worked at the hatchery. And the owner and I used to have a lot of conversations, because I used to ask him how he got into this and what inspired him or his father who actually started it. And over time, I came to realize that, there was this sort of a symbiotic relationship where they were helping sea turtle conservation. But at the same time, the sea turtles were helping these guys get livelihoods. And they used to earn really well because of, tourism. And I think everyone knows at this point, sea turtle hatcheries are one of the, hotspots, must see kind of a thing when you visit Sri Lanka. Because of this, a lot of them were barely educated. They knew languages like, German and Russian and Hindi and all of that. And that's when it sort of started, it struck me that, what, there is this relationship that's going on, especially when the communities live so close to, or, with the wildlife. It's very important to take into consideration their roles and how they can contribute and benefit from it. And of course, after that, when I started working in Orissa, there were certain field assistants who were from the local villages. Again, super passionate people, and Velas, where ecotourism has helped conservation and livelihoods and things like that. And with every experience, it just became so much more clear that you can try super hard to separate the two, but one is dependent on the other. And especially even in terms of research, I think um, we can do all our data collection, and we can have all our statistics in place and things like that, but ever since these experiences, I've also realized that it's so much better to sort of back it up by just talking to the local people, because they have so much information. They've grown up around these areas or watching these things, and they have so much information and so many interesting things that you cannot find out just by going out every night on the beach and collecting your data. And it also prepares you for what's to come during the course of your field work, or sometimes it might just give a completely new direction to what you're planning to study, which animals or plants can't do. They can't come and possibly tell you that we're going to do this. So I think human beings are definitely an asset when it comes to our work, and yeah, we should take into consideration their involvement, and perhaps even help them out if we can. But and I think they enjoy that too. Just speak to them and they feel so nice. They feel like, okay, somebody's considering me an expert on these things, and you're like, but you are, you've lived there for so long, you are an expert, more than us for sure. So yeah, it again, it was all an experience-based thing, but I have come to sort of treasure all these experiences, and henceforth also I do want to include some component of working with human beings. I don't think human beings are easy to work with, but yeah, at the same time they're valuable, so it's important.
Yeah, I cannot agree with you more, and I see so I empathize with that transition so much, like going in with natural history and realizing that it's the people who have who have your hypotheses. Your hypotheses should come from the local community. You might test them however you do it, but yeah. Uh, and with this, I have a follow up. Now, is this coming of age ceremony of sorts, right, where you get in, spend 3 years floundering in this imagined space of I'm going to change the world, and then you get more zen, grounded by field realities. Can we shorten this for people coming into this field through training, things like that?
Absolutely. Like I said, when we even started this podcast, I think I'm so glad you guys are doing this, because in your classes you will have your theory down, you will have all your ID and this and that, you'll be great at that. But once you go to field, it just changes you. And especially in our field, where we're not just biologists, ecologists, or conservationists, but we also have to be like an administrator, a project manager, personal manager, and driver, and just multiple different things at the same time. And I think a lot of people, even us for that matter, when I'm pretty sure, when even you guys were sort of entering this field, you were not completely aware of all the other things that come along with just doing the science of it, right? And I think that is something, of course, which is not taught in our classrooms. But at the same time, I think even as professionals, I don't think through, I mean, now with like blogs and stuff, people have been sharing their experiences, which I think is great. But I know, I mean, I myself don't quite share all the grievances that actually happen during my field work, or just generally also even in my non-field work time. and it's just all pretty, beautiful photos and pretty blue water and all the nice things that get highlighted, but not actually how you got that photo, how many days you had to wait to get that photo, how many mosquitoes you had to endure to get that photo, and things like that. But yeah, I definitely feel, I think, everywhere there has to be at least one course which is just about like what it is to be a field biologist, because again, there's just like this romanticized version of it, which is not the real version. And also, apart from that, there also needs to be like this, somebody needs to preach that conservation may not always be successful, and that's okay. And we had, during my master's, we had this one course where, the guy told us like this beautiful story of some birds in Hawaii where there were just like 4 or 5 individuals left, and all these scientists went in to like save the species and all of that. And we were like, oh my God, this might be a conservation success story and the species must be saved now and thriving and all of that. He was like, no, some of the birds ended up actually dying, and the species eventually went extinct. And it shook us because we were like, this is not what you teach conservation students. You should be telling us happy stories, but they were like, no, you don't. Conservation's not all about happiness. You need to be okay with the fact that sometimes it might not work out. You just appreciate your work, take a step back, cry it. Of course, everyone needs to cry once in a while for sure. But at the same time, be practical about things at the end of the day and go for it. And yeah, I think in India we do need it, because I have spoken to a lot of 20 somethings or like teenagers who are really interested in getting into wildlife biology or marine biology, but they're completely unaware of what they're actually getting into, and that makes it difficult when they have that first experience, because if they are unaware, then that experience is going to be really bad for some. For those who are quite hardy and flexible, it's fine, but again, you need to take into consideration people who aren't. And then you don't want them to leave with a bad taste in their mouth. But yeah, I agree. I think every wildlife course in India especially needs to have at least one, even just like guest lecturers coming in and talking about their experiences in different sort of ecosystems, because again, working in terrestrial is very different from marine. Ishika has waded through forests. I hope there weren't any leeches or anything, but if there were, then it's not fun, but you got to do it, right? Whereas for us, it's relatively easy.
I don't know about easy. I mean, I think you guys also have a lot of sandflies to deal with, and a whole other bunch of logistical issues that we don't have to face, which actually, I'm going to ask you to describe to our listeners what it's like. Maybe not a day on the beach or a night on the beach, rather, because of the turtle work, with what you do, because it's so different from the actual footwork that you do in a terrestrial system. Like both Akshay and I have worked in forested areas or even some of these semi-urban areas. But of course, the challenges are very different, but I'm sure there are challenges even in the marine side of things. I'm sure it's not easy.
I don't know, I think it's, I don't know. I think it's definitely easier than what your terrestrial folks have to go through. But yeah, I mean, if I have to talk about my experiences, when I was doing this research assistantship in Costa Rica, so we had to monitor like a 4-mile stretch of the beach, and one side of the beach would go towards the river mouth and the other side would go towards the national park. Now, the beauty of both these sides was, so per night, we would monitor only one side, like one team would monitor one side. And the beauty of these two sides was, whichever side you go, there's going to be either sandflies or mosquitoes. So you have to take your pick. And there was one night where I was given the river mouth side, like one night after the other. So 2 nights in a row, I go to that side. And those sandflies are horrible, horrible. Like we would be completely covered with just our eyes open so that, we could see the turtles and tag them and write and things like that. But those sandflies, as soon as you would turn your flashlight on, they would just be on me. And after 2 nights, this entire part around my eyes was swollen. I was worried. I didn't know what was going to happen. Thankfully, they gave me a break because they were like, okay, you clearly need a night off. Otherwise, a third night in a row with mosquitoes or sandflies, something horrible is going to happen. And it was such a hindrance in your work because you're working, you're having a great time. Beaches are great, but you have these sandflies. The other exciting thing that happened in Costa Rica, which has never happened to anyone I know, is so for sea turtle nests, you have to dig out the contents once the hatchlings have left to measure the success. And that's what we used to do during the daytime. And this one time, a friend of mine, she had like this strange line across her arm. And at first we thought, it might just be like some mosquito bite, which is inflamed or something swollen. We didn't pay much attention. Over the days, that line started getting longer and it was like an actual bump under her skin. Okay. And we're like, okay, maybe she needs to get this checked. And she did, only to realize that it was a parasite that was sort of eating, under the top layer of her skin and growing longer. And yeah, it was basically like monsters inside of me happening. And then, then they asked all of us to check our bodies and it turned out that out of 8 of us, 6 of us had it. One person had like on 3 parts, her arms and both her thighs. And these were parasites we picked up while digging the nests out, apparently deposited by the, feral dogs there through their feces and whatnot. And we were like, in my wildest dreams, I never imagined with sea turtles, I'd pick up some random parasites and whatnot. But yeah, when I think about it, I think fieldwork for me has generally been quite cozy and fun and a lot of excitement. I think only the bad things that have happened is once or twice, like I've fallen on the beach because of these turtle unsuccessful nests, but because they're super deep and you can try and see at night, but sometimes your vision just fails you and just like go down into the earth. Or fieldwork fails for me has been mainly because of weather. Like this one time when we went to do offshore monitoring of turtles, that was one of the days when I was kind of sure that I was probably not going to make it back alive to land because the sea got super choppy. The entire time I was just looking at the shore and wondering how much time it'll take me to swim to shore if I have to get out of this situation and stuff. But yeah, these are rare occurrences. I think I do think us marine folks are a little spoiled because it is relatively easier for us. I won't say there are any romantic walks. Those walks always end up being something or the other ends up happening, but nothing too drastic. We ran into some poachers in Costa Rica as well. But yeah, nothing too life-threatening. But yeah, fieldwork for me has always been fun. It's either involved like walking on the beaches, which is always great, or snorkeling or diving, which again is a lot of fun. I think if you take enough precautions, if you're careful, nothing can kind of go wrong. And yeah, just being mindful of things around you. But yeah, trust me, I think you guys need to shift to marine. Terrestrial is very tough. You always have like all this foliage to get across with your machetes or whatnot. So,
Oh man, yeah. No, it's just so nice to even just listen to what it's like to do some of this marine field work, because I mean, like, I also almost wanted to get into a marine field, and it's like I think anybody who goes on one good dive is just so mesmerized. And yeah, I think it's wonderful that one can actually do that all their lives. It's a wonder more people don't do
but
it.
I know, but I think, like I said, Ishika, you should make a switch, because trust me, like during my field work, I've seen a jaguar. Okay, like I was working on sea turtle monitoring. I've seen jaguars.
Wow.
Mistaken it for a dog, but that's fine. um, Thankfully, I was accompanied by my coordinator who told me to like stop and not get enthusiastic about some large dog. Um, but yeah, when you go on dives and stuff, you get to see not just the species or that little invertebrate or whatever you're working on, but on a single dive, I've seen rays, I've seen sharks, I've seen turtles. There's all this life just zooming past you, whereas at terrestrial you have to have your binoculars, you have to turn over a rock, you have to like cut down some plants to go through. If you're in some rainforest, which I'm sure Akshay must have experienced, have some leeches jumping on you, and whatnot. So yeah, I don't think us marine folks have had to suffer through too much of these things. It's been great.
Yeah, you've got me feeling quite existential now. I'm going to rethink my career options at the end of our recording. um, but it's also going to bring me to maybe something which I spent a lot of time thinking about when even at the time where I was seriously thinking about looking at the marine side of things, which was it's an interesting dichotomy, because it can in some ways be very isolating, because like we were saying earlier, it's very local, all your efforts, whether it's with the communities or the species you're working with. But at the same time, marine systems are the most globally connected systems. I mean, everything is in a way connected, and the same species that you see on one beach today could be traveling to another continent the next day, and bringing so much geography and biology from the rest of the world with it, perhaps before the next time you see that individual again. So how does one navigate this as a marine biologist, because you're constantly kind of having to juggle between something that's very context specific, very local, but at the same time the issues that you're tackling are very global issues, right?
No, it is difficult. And you do end up getting into this mindset where you're just focusing at that site and that species at that site, because that's the most you can do, right? Especially like you said, sea turtles or sharks and all these other animals, they just migrate. For them, there are no boundaries. So it's not, they don't think that I'm foraging in India and nesting in maybe Pakistan or whatever. For them, they're just like, I'm going from point A to point B. But going back to what I had answered earlier, I always think of the marine world as Pune, as like when it comes to people, because everyone knows everyone, or everyone knows somebody who knows someone. And when it comes to working together or in terms of collaboration, I think it gets easier. And that sort of gives you a good feeling to a certain extent, because you know that, okay, you are doing your part from your end. And if you have the right collaborators and good collaborators, they'll do their part on the other end. And especially now with um, terrestrial, it's easy because it's accessible for most part. With marine, it's largely unexplored or cannot be explored by somebody like me. So again, that kind of limits us, because there's only so much we can do and only so far we can go. It also gives you that escapist sort of attitude where you're just like, oh, I can't go there, I can't do that there. But at the same time, yeah, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. But you just think that in this place at this time with this species or habitat, I am going to do the most that I can, hoping that the person on the other side is also doing the same. And I think most places across the world are at this point, which is a great thing. I think each day there are just growing numbers of people who've started realizing the importance of marine conservation in general, and are contributing towards it, one way or the other. Even if it's just one fisherman somewhere, who's sensitive about these issues, he has the capacity or the power to convert 10 more people. And even that little bit that they can do is conservation in itself. So yeah, I think it's important sometimes to think local, before you think global. And yeah, attend enough conferences and meetings, and okay, there is a global going on there, and that's a good feeling.
Yeah. I think segueing from there to what you currently do, I was just wondering, I saw on your web profile that you're studying the impact of diving on coral reefs, which is a very, if I could put in the context of what you just said, it's a local thing, but it's probably a global phenomena where, everywhere it's happening. Can you tell us more? How does diving impact coral reefs?
So I think, okay, I'm going to start from the basics. Coral reefs, as we all know, have the biggest threat to coral reefs is global warming, climate change, all the El Nino events. Then, of course, we have marine pollution, you have coastal construction, you have all this shipping and this and that, which is just adding to the stress that, climate change is already causing. Now, diving is not that big a threat, but the problem is when you have something like El Nino events that are happening, thrice in a decade, or you have an increase in the development in a certain area, or marine pollution. Even the little contribution that diving makes is large, especially now with diving becoming more accessible. Earlier on, it wasn't so accessible. It was also quite expensive for a lot of people. But of course, over time, there are a lot of takers for it, which has opened a whole new market of dive tourism. And a lot more dive operators now function across different sites, which basically then there's a competition, so they reduce their rates, so they get more clients, and therefore you have more people coming in and diving. Now, the problem with this also is diving is great and everything, but in order to improve the tourism aspect of it, you also have these DSDs, which is Discover Scuba, which is great because it does allow you to experience it without having to go through the entire training, which again, the training is expensive. So the DSD does allow you to, quickly get a glimpse of what it's like underwater, or even just understand if you would be comfortable underwater. But the thing is, when you put in a lot of trainees or a lot of people who you don't know whether they're uncomfortable underwater in these fragile systems, there is bound to be some damage or the other. Again, we all think coral reefs or, associated animals or sea turtles and fishes, we all think they might be hardy and so strong, this and that. But the matter of fact is they aren't. And then if you have all these, 5-6 people who are getting trained, but at the same time they are kicking corals and breaking corals, or like touching them, causing some harm or the other, it's going to have an impact. And so with diving, it was, since the 90s, in fact, there were studies that had started cropping up from different parts of the world, from like the Great Barrier Reef to Philippines, Red Sea, in the Caribbean, like Bahamas and whatnot, where they realized that in its own little way, diving is, having a negative impact on the coral reef ecosystem in the areas. And the beauty of all these studies was they actually employed different methods. They looked at different things. There were comparisons between heavily used sites and uh, barely used sites. They looked at diver behavior underwater. They looked at how the dive briefing can influence diver behavior underwater and things like that. And it was seen that in a lot of areas where there's more diving, you find a lot of dead coral or broken corals. There's higher prevalence of coral diseases. Some even started looking at, behavior of associated fishes. So they found out that there were fewer number of fish at a site which was highly like popular dive site compared to one that wasn't. And sort of coming to the Indian context, every day we're seeing nowadays a lot of people have these beautiful underwater photos and things like that, which is evidence in itself that diving is picking up quite a bit in India. But at the same time, we have all these fragile ecosystems like the Lakshwadweep or in the Andaman and Nicobars, where the coral reefs already facing a lot of threat. And with all new development that is all, and there's already, like, we already know what we're getting into. And I think diver community in itself is quite aware of the do's and don'ts, so to speak. For example, there's Project Aware, which works across the world to in terms of diver conduct underwater, or just reducing marine debris and things like that. So while the diver community is aware, we're bound to make some mistakes once in a while, because again, the underwater is a completely foreign world. And panic induced movements and things like that. And therefore we sort of looked at all these things and saw how it is something that we at least need to check if it has any impact. If it doesn't, that's great. That's actually the best news. But if there is, I think it's very important for us to just kind of put the word out that we need to be a lot more aware than how much we are right now, especially tourists. For us as ecologists, at some point, it's been drilled into our head that we need to be more aware of our surroundings, we need to respect our surroundings and all of that. But I think responsible tourism is something that we need to really highlight as we go forward, and especially as instances of all these other threats just keep on increasing and worsening the situation. And of course, our own experiences. I think anyone who's gone diving, the first one or two dives have definitely been where you've come extremely close to coral only to realize you're too close, and then you move away. Or you've seen someone wanting to touch a fish or just do something that they should not be doing and try to scream underwater at them, and things like that. So I think it's again a very experience based thing, because we've all experienced this at one point or another, and then that is sort of helping us ensure that hopefully it's not happening. So let's see.
No, this is so important. This reminds me in a terrestrial context. There's also extensive research. I think research also going back to the same site. There's interviewee fatigue in the social sciences. I'm sure there's ecological fatigue when you're constantly interacting with certain landscapes. So yeah, I think this sounds interesting. We'll probably get back to you on another episode to hear the results of this.
That's only if I get to go to Lakshadweep, but
Oh yeah. No, it's amazing how many layers there are to every problem, right? I mean, on one hand, you want people to go and look at what's underwater and know what's there, and how they need to care about the life that's underwater as well. But getting them underwater can also be harmful for that entire ecosystem. It's kind of like a catch-22. But it's great to know that you guys are actually trying to figure out, like you said, if that is even a problem that we need to be worried about to begin with. And Yeah, I can definitely think of at least 5 instances where I've gone way too close to coral, or accidentally had to grab onto a tiny piece of coral when the when the current is trying to pull me away. And yeah, I mean, I really wonder if what harm I've done, and I'm sure so many others have. And it makes me think a lot about the tourism in Goa as well, where there are so many of these dunk divers where they just kind of plop you into the water for a few minutes, take a picture, and get you out of there. And you never know how
Yeah.
that person was going to behave underwater, or what they're going to do to the life around them.
You're right. It's that I think it's called tea bag diving.
Ah, yes.
And that apparently, has a lot more impact than your regular, because trained divers are, like I said, they are quite aware of these things and they are very sensitive uh, towards these things. But again, put people in an unfamiliar situation for the first time, and you don't know what's going to be the end result. So yeah.
I think we're coming to the end of the podcast, and this has been great. And we wish we could keep talking, but we'll probably have you back next time. I think to wrap up, I was wondering, you brought up something right at the beginning. You spoke about how important your support system with your parents and your friends were, and also at your university, and that passion which was infectious. And we see how important that is for so many people. I mean, I guess this is a truism. It's true in all fields. It depends. You make or break a subject in school or your career choice based on your interactions with people. Based on your experience, do you think there are things that we can do to make that experience better for people, to realize that the first failure is not doesn't mean there's a next failure following? And how has your life experience sort of taught you that?
I think we need to start off by normalizing the fact that there's no one way to go about things. Um, you know, it was something acceptable or generally, the best thing to do earlier on, where, you do your studies, you perhaps do your PhD, you do your postdoc, then you've made it in your life, sort of a thing. So I think to start off, we need to normalize the fact that you can do your PhD or not do your PhD, it's fine. Whether you do your PhD right after your master's or 3 years later or 5 years later or even 20 years later for that matter, it's fine. Um, and I think just being a little forgiving, allowing that other person to be the way they are, because especially when you're coming into a new field, like I said earlier, you come with rose tinted glasses and you have this completely wrong view of how things are going to pan out. And then if you have a supervisor or an immediate senior who's just waiting to like pounce on you on every word you say, you're just going to leave with a bad experience. Even if your experience on field was great, just that interaction with people is going to make you feel bad and perhaps rethink whether you even want to be around. And I think as as we ourselves are getting senior in this field and we have our interns, or we're supervising MSc students and all, I think we need to be really forgiving and really careful that they have just got in. Let's sort of mentor them, let them reach that comfortable stage. See, over time we all learn. It's not like the three of us got into this field prepared and we just knew how to behave and what to do and what to say and things like that. But I think the right kind of mentorship also, just having someone who is mentoring you in a nice way also, not just telling you all the right things, but telling you the right things in a nice way and not trying to demean you at every step. Giving people what they deserve, whether it's monetarily. And I think unfortunately, because we are in such a new field, or a field that's still kind of growing in the country, there is that, it's kind of lacking when it comes. And I think that's also a reason why we don't have a lot of people who are really interested, even though they're interested, they're hesitant to join, because they perhaps do not come from a background that allows them to take up their passion so freely. I think, it's just a bunch of these things that definitely need to change. And I think they are changing again. I think, our generation is again a lot more aware of these things. Of course, we have our own flaws, but in terms of improvement, because we all have been through something or the other, we are being sensitive to it when we are working with our interns and students. Again, it's getting better, but of course, the rate at which it will get better will take its own time. And hopefully in our lifetimes, we will get to see, a really good work environment in general. I'm going to plug in SCCS at this point, but I think one of the aims of SCCS is to make it, not have a hierarchy, but everyone is at the same level, whether you're a student or an early career researcher, or even a full professor at some prestigious institute. Everyone should be able to talk to one another, share ideas, speak freely, regardless of your background or your experience and things like that. And yeah, I think, like I said earlier, over time it'll definitely get better. And again, people like us, we will sort of bring about that change. And I know we're all working towards that in our own little ways. So yeah.
Glad you brought it up because in one of our previous episodes with Krishna Priya Tamma, we spoke extensively about SCCS as well. So SCCS is the Student Conference for Conservation Science, which happens almost every year in Bangalore, and it's one of the few hubs where people all across India can come and meet some of the experts in the field, and it's amazing the kinds of steps that the conference is taking, and it's to make things inclusive and sort of reduce the information asymmetry that exists. And it's clear that we need to not just restrict it to a conference, but make it our work ethic in wherever we work. So how I just want to follow up, since you mentioned SCCS, I think it's worth talking about it. It seems like a lot of people, for many people, it's a labor of love, and and at the same time, you have to kill your babies, as they say, when you write. How has it been trying to change with the times, adapt to technology, and all of the things that we discussed with making this field more inclusive and approachable for young people?
Sorry, how has it been getting SCCS online? Is that your question?
Yes, for COVID as well, but also like changing through time, because I'm guessing it was very different when it started, right?
Yeah, it's again, SCCS is such a great learning experience, regardless of whether you're a volunteer or an organizer or whatever. There are so many things that we would like to do. And every year we do try to bring in something new. And, I think the pre-conference module was such a great example of that, where people from communities who are passionate about conservation or wildlife, but for one reason or the other do not have that scientific training, so to speak. And I think pre-conference module sort of brought in that and has done such a great job at it. But it is challenging, even when we're deciding what to do and how much to do, there's always some restriction or the other. We also, almost every year, we realize that even though SCCS has a decent reach, it's still not reaching out, folks that live in like smaller towns and things like that. Especially now, because kids from cities like Bangalore and Pune and Chennai, Delhi, all this, everything said and done, they have a lot more exposure, not just because of internet, but also, because they get chances to do like internships and things like that. But it's been challenging to sort of trying to reach out to that audience, which is sort of removed from the city areas. And we're just trying to find different ways, whether we need to up our advertising abilities, whether we should reduce the amount of money that we charge as registration, increasing the number of bursaries so that spending money is not an issue, because that is usually what tends to restrict people. At the same time, we've also sort of thought about having certain sessions in local languages, but then again in India it's so difficult. Thinking outside of India, because Africa and other South Asian countries, how can we include them? Because Bangalore is sort of in the center of all these places, so how can we sort of improve and increase that audience? And every year in smaller, we're taking like baby steps to sort of cover these things, but it all comes down to funding. It all comes down to money, because it's such a great platform and we have great partners, and all these senior folks are so involved in it, and all those workshops are just incredible. So we want to make it something more, but there's always that one limiting factor. But we are trying to make it more than what it is or what it has been, one step at a time. And yeah, I don't know if in my tenure as an OC there'll be big changes, but over time, maybe in the next 5 years or so, we'll definitely see SCCS become bigger and a lot more inclusive than what it is already. We've realized that perhaps moving things online could also be an asset for certain things, because surprisingly, like last year when SCCS went online, and we ended up getting really good number of registrations and abstracts and all of that, which was really nice to see, because clearly people love SCCS. So they are willing to sort of rough it out, even if we open abstracts just for 2 weeks kind of a thing. But yeah, we got good feedback, and a lot of them actually said that it will be easier for them if certain things move online, and it'll be easier for them to access it from the comforts of their homes and things like that. But again, it boils down to not just sort of the physical financial aspect of it, but also our capabilities at the end of the day. We would love to do a hybrid if possible, but a conference is all about networking. It's all about actually meeting people and talking to them. And I personally did not enjoy this online thing, because I prefer meeting face to face and having a proper conversation with them. And I think online it's just so alien. But yeah, a lot of people appreciated it and actually enjoyed it. So, we're thinking that, okay, we should probably make use of that and hopefully move few things online. I mean, things like plenaries and all can definitely be, they can be shown live on YouTube and whatnot. But maybe perhaps other sessions also, if it's doable and if it does, give the output that we desire, and, everyone comes away happy and with some positive output. So yeah, let's see.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right in the sense that we are in general moving towards something which looks a lot more hybrid. And I think considering we've been forced to do some things online for a much longer period than we initially were expecting, we've just, I think a lot of it has just become a very natural part of our day to day. And I think we're also getting very used to doing things from home, and perhaps even things like the financial constraints of travel and accommodation, which perhaps many people who don't get bursaries cannot afford to take on. The online platform also fixes some of that, perhaps. So I think it'll be definitely very interesting to see where we go from here, because I think in the last year has also showed us how much good the online platform can give. So even if we end up finally, hopefully soon, at a point where we don't necessarily have to be online, maybe we'd still choose to, considering some of those pros that we've discovered in the past year. including this podcast. I mean, I don't think we would have managed to pull this off if everyone wasn't getting used to doing online calls on Zoom.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think last year was a great tutorial for all of us in, doing things online. I'm sure even you guys felt uncomfortable initially while doing webinars and stuff, where you were like, can you hear me? Can you see me? Just thinking you're presenting to an audience that's not even there, or perhaps not seeing what you're seeing. But it's incredible. We've learned so much.
Yeah, definitely. I think even the tiniest things of human interaction that we took for granted, you suddenly realize are completely missing. I think the first webinar I had to do online, I was pointing at my screen saying, oh, so you see this? And then I realized, wait, nobody can see what I'm pointing at. Yeah.
I can one-up you there. My first webinar, I started sharing my screen, or I thought I was sharing my screen, and I just started talking about it, and then at one point I was talking about the graph that was on my screen. And then the guy who was hosting it was like, wait, what graph? Are you sharing anything? And I was like, what?
Oh no.
Now you tell me, like 10 minutes into the conversation, you're asking me if I'm sharing anything. I thought I was. But yeah, I was just talking to the audience for the first 10 minutes. And later my parents were like, oh no, we thought you weren't planning to show any presentation. We thought you were just going to talk. So I was like, okay, great. I think I pulled it off somehow. But, yeah.
At least everyone's very forgiving online.
I hope so.
Oh. Okay, well, I think this is as good a time as any to hit pause on this conversation. And like Akshay said, we'd hopefully have you back to tell us more about the work you're currently doing, and the hope that you'll get to go to Lakshwadweep soon and come back with more stories for us. So thanks so much for talking to us. This has been such fun.
Thank you so much. Like I said, have Lakshadweep stories. There are too many. And I would love to just sit down with you guys, maybe not online also, and just talk about these things.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good day.
You too.
You too.
We had a great time recording this episode. We hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks for listening.